room 322, yes.
Thank you. You can move your table a little closer. Not to create a fire. Are we ready or not? Yes. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Nothing really. Can we have calm, please? Okay. And you guys,
Second.
first or second?
Second.
Second? Okay. And you guys are calm? Just, right first, what's your guys' names? And Sophie. And Omar and Sophie, and your speaker one. And then which one's gonna be speaker one on your side?
So, yeah.
So here? And then Ali, you will be speaker two?
Yeah.
Okay. You're ready.
My partner and I must negate the resolution that NGOs are more effective than governmental organizations at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. This is due to their weak planning and management capacity, their interdependence on governments, and their lower productivity in the healthcare sector. Our first contention as to why non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people is that they don't. One example of this study that was conducted by the Steering Committee for the Evaluation of the Netherlands Co-Financing Program, it stated that an increase in governmental intervention in the Dutch co-finance NGO projects raised concern among other NGOs as they were worried about losing funding. They were not able to demonstrate immediate project-related poverty impacts. This then led to a bigger concern for their own NGO survival rather than the disadvantaged population. As opposed to this, the Pan American Health Organization relays that in 1986, countries adopted a regional policy to improve coordination of international humanitarian health assistance. All Latin American and Caribbean nations have health disaster coordinators within their ministries of health who not only coordinate relief efforts in the event of a disaster, but continuously update emergency plans and conduct preparedness training for health and medical personnel. In addition to this, a more recent movement in 2018 was taken by the Australian government, who, according to the Australian Government Initiative, established the disaster relief and recovery arrangements to alleviate the financial burden on the states and to facilitate the early supplies of assistance to disaster-affected communities. These examples are showing the level of organization and systems that governments are implementing in order to have a more efficient outcomes in disaster reliefs that date back all the way to 1986. My second contention is that NGOs rely on governments in order to maximize effectiveness. Therefore, governments serve as fundamental and essential to them. Which brings me to the example where, according to Henrik Morgensen in the Review of African Political Economy, on average, a third of NGO funds stem from governmental sources. However, this is insufficient evidence to tell us how this NGO aid is spent, or how effective it is in the long run. Another primary example of this would be the use of military assets. According to the Guide to Non-Governmental Organizations for the Military, in 1990, worldwide NGOs and the world militaries worked with one another in countries like Somalia, Bosnia, northern Iraq, Albania, and Kosovo after the Indian Ocean tsunami. This proves that without the use of military assets, they would not be able to provide disaster relief in areas to begin with. According to Funds for NGOs, the United States Agency for International Development is a major contributor of international development aid. Its financial assistance to NGOs in developing countries runs into millions of dollars every year. This large donation is another instance of NGOs' interdependence on governmental resources. Lastly, the actions of these NGOs are not clearly as productive as the governments in the healthcare sector. NGOs are reliant on donations, therefore can't be considered long-term. However, with the consistent opportunity for the flow of money, governments can. This can be demonstrated in the healthcare sectors. Governments provide their countries with the long-term solutions as a part of their mandate. According to the World Population Review, countries such as China, Pakistan, Mexico, Malaysia, and many more offer little to no cost healthcare to all of their citizens. Due to their weak planning and management capacity, their interdependence on governments, and low productivity in the healthcare sector, we must negate the resolution that NGOs are more effective than governmental organizations at improving the lives of people.
We're here today to affirm the resolution that on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments in improving lives of disadvantaged people. Under the pretenses wherein disadvantaged people are commonly defined as those who have lived in substandard conditions due to poverty, lack of opportunity, hunger, physical/mental issues, unemployment, war, or natural factors when compared to members of the first world community. Whereas NGOs would be defined as internationally operating groups specialized in the field of humanitarian aid and the alleviation of crises that may lead to substandard living in developing communities. Whereas effective would be resolving the problem whilst ensuring the maximization of resources, hence conserving the effort and capital for future profits. Whereas governments would be defined as bodies of governments that presume control in part over the people of the sovereign state, whilst excluding intergovernmental frameworks and other such entities. The primary contention of this speech is that NGOs often have the capability to function in niche environments that are very rarely addressed by state governments. Thereby, NGOs are tasked with a variety of orientations. Amongst them, the provision of goods and services and resources, which accounts for 41% of NGOs. General development / raising of living standards, which accounts for a further 38%. Mobilization and consciousness raising, which accounts for 31%. Promotion of self-reliance, 21%. Lobbying and advocacy work, 10%. Empowerment, a further 10%. And institutional experimentation, which accounts for the final 7% of all NGOs, as reported by UNRIC case. Thereby, NGOs are simply more versatile and may be able to function in a larger range of scenarios and governments. Only two previous scenarios are provided under the pretenses of a typical governmental social contract, thereby enabling NGOs to address a multitude of niche issues that would otherwise ravage local minorities, thereby stifling development, ultimately mitigating the growth of the rural community. Furthermore, the UNRIC affirms that NGOs, especially local development NGOs, are often seen as being the agencies that are most committed to the goal of equitable development. Thereby, it is indicative that NGOs significantly improve the living standards of impoverished populations in order to reinforce the development of society through providing an assortment of services to those in need in order to standardize the quality of life among national populations. Thereby, NGOs are crucial assets to nations. The second contention of this argument is that NGOs occasionally equip disadvantaged people with tools they need to establish a sustainable lifestyle. The India Times reports that the American India Foundation's MASS program has increased the Indian workforce by 45,000 individuals despite the recent recession, many of which are underprivileged or abused young adults. The NGOs successfully train said individuals the skills they need to perform tasks ranging from automotive maintenance to directing internal tours. On a related note, Kenya witnessed a 400% increase in NGO activity in recent years, whilst the quantity of registered NGOs in South Africa has surpassed 100,000, many of which are oriented towards the provision of education and social awareness services. It's evident that education has become significant to modern development, as the OECD's Chief of Staff Gabriela Ramos remarks that evidence shows that children at disadvantages in the education system typically go on to receive smaller salaries and most worryingly of all, the shorter lives. Third contention of this speech is that NGOs are more versatile than their counterparts. The UNRIC affirms the state. NGOs are significant service providers in the rural areas of Zimbabwe, operating clinics and schools. NGOs who see themselves as development-oriented typically want to go beyond service provisioning to attack the root causes of poverty. The perceptions of the problem of poverty and the solutions are based largely on the assumption that rural productivity must be improved, and their programs take a similar approach to that to the development efforts of developed governments, thus allowing development-oriented NGOs to encompass a high degree of proactive behavior when compared to governments.
What is your reasoning for NGOs being able to work in a wider selection of locations?
The UNRSD affirms that they have been working in multiple scenarios. The UNRSD is a renowned research organization under the United Nations and has reported that NGOs have worked in a multitude of scenarios wherein governments have failed to access. In regards to the Pan American 1986 health accord, has there been progress since 1986, or is there any statistical evidence that may be given?
Well, I can give you a couple of scenarios where the health ministries of health have come to play. For example, in the Hurricane George in the Dominican Republic, Hurricane Mitch in Central America, and the earthquake Armenia in Colombia in 1999.
Where may this be sourced from?
My question. I'll give you this one. My partner. What are the credentials of Gabriela in your second contention?
Gabriela Ramos is the head of the OECD, which is the pan-European organization that facilitates the alleviation of crises made beyond hands of the governments for the hands of the NGOs. Furthermore, you said that 1/3 of NGOs receive funding from government, or 1/3 of NGOs' funds are from government. Isn't that just evidence that governments may not do their job and are simply sponsoring NGOs to do the job for them?
No, on a third of NGO funds.
Okay.
Oh, but the point is without the funds, the NGOs aren't able to run. So whether the governments are doing their job or not, the NGOs need the government for them to run sufficiently.
You brought. Okay, okay.
Do you have any statistical evidence for your first contention? And if you can say your first contention, because
As they are more versatile, and we have a percentage. Well, we have an accounting percentages based on the fields in which different NGOs work in. So we do have. Furthermore, you mentioned military assets. How do you respond to the fact that Turkey has used military assets to attack the Kurds and commit various infringements of human rights?
well, I mean that is just one example. And if we're talking on balance, there are many more examples of where assets can be used, like I gave the example of Somalia, Bosnia, and Northern Iraq, where in the Indian Ocean tsunami. You mentioned the NGO in Zimbabwe that was, are there any statistics of an effect they had on?
Yes, there's a case study about mitigating the effects of rural poverty, and is thereby indicative that NGOs have been able to do such work in alleviating poverty by increasing the productivity of rural settlements.
Our opponents refer to NGOs as more development and result-oriented. However, I will enlighten you shortly on how this organization of NGOs actually causes a lack of results in development in a certain country. As previously stated, my partner and I are here today to negate that on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Our next reasons as to why this holds true is their lack of coordination amongst one another, their participation in inhumane and illegal actions, and their inflated overhead costs. Our first contention is that NGOs lack coordination amongst one another. This is apparent in emergency response efforts, where there is risk of overlapping in sectors, locations, and beneficiaries, and ignoring other segments of the society. Another element to this lack of coordination is the negligence of previous and current efforts exerted by similar NGOs, which leads to reinventing the wheel repeatedly. Referring to global policy, an example of this is following the Rwandan genocide, where hundreds of these small organizations tried to set up operations in refugee camps in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Tanzania. With the struggle of space, some of these camps turned into a staging post for armed factions. Throughout this chaos, an estimated 50,000 refugees died from cholera. Their lack of coordination and disorganization amongst themselves had now cost them hundreds of lives of refugees displaced from their homes. The second contention is that NGOs participate in inhumane and illegal actions. For example, according to The Guardian, a French NGO had attempted to smuggle children out of Chad without obtaining permission from either their parents or the government. If that isn't enough, according to the Washington Post, Oxfam International, one of the world's largest NGOs, admitted that some staff members engaged in sexual misconduct in the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. Through these mere actions, it is evident that alleviating communities is not their biggest concern, and that they are rather clouded in judgment. Our final contention is that the money that is being donated to NGOs does not directly translate to money spent on the beneficiaries. A big flaw in NGOs is the inflated benefits of the staff, otherwise known as overhead. These benefits include salaries, travel, per diems, and other allowances. For any business, an overhead rate of 10 to 15% is considered efficient. Yet the expectation remains that NGOs should have even lower rates. However, contrary to this, organizations such as Autism Spectrum Disorder Foundation has a reported 90.4% total overhead, or the Wishing Well Foundation USA, whose goal is to fulfill the wishes of terminally ill children in the United States, with a total overhead of 91.8%. These percentages represent the amount that is taken away per dollar received in donations toward previously mentioned benefits. With this in mind, a significantly lower percentage of donations is actually being spent on improving the lives of disadvantaged people, and rather spent on perks for the workers in the NGOs. Due to their lack of coordination amongst one another, their participation in inhumane and illegal actions, and their inflated overhead costs, we must negate the resolution that NGOs are more effective than governmental organizations at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Thank you.
So that,
You may have 30 seconds.
I have a source.
30 seconds. Okay, so essentially we want to governance and state issues.
everybody ready? The first contention of this argument is that NGOs are often less hesitant regarding the implementation of new innovative methods of alleviating crises. A Digitalist, a renowned forum, reads that there is an approximately 12 million independent NGOs with both local and multinational stature. Furthermore, this source comments that said agencies often operate hand in hand with state governments on a variety of levels for the betterment of society. However, the Digitalist reaffirms that when NGOs take full advantage of innovative technology solutions, their impact increases greatly. They can both improve their business operations and also how they deliver aid. Thereby, NGOs are striving to achieve optimal efficiency through the use of experimental technology superior to that of a developing nation's government. A prominent example of such would be Don Solidaris, which is dedicated to helping over 300 charities order basic necessities for the nearly 600,000 people they serve through the donation of excess non-food goods. Don Solidaris offers this service through an automated online catalog and inventory system. This technology has helped them increase their efforts threefold while maintaining a minimum number of employees and volunteers, according to the Digitalist and Don Solidaris. The American Red Cross's efforts to maximize its donation fund by reducing the internal processing time of its expense management system. This allows the agency to focus more on front-end business processes and ultimately the organization's constituents. Moreover, tech journalist Dante Reed confirms that with technologies like mobile tracking, mapping, data analytics, and cloud, NGOs can zero in on the needs of the people they serve more efficiently and even help prevent crises and find their underlying causes. With time, said data would become vital to national governments worldwide. Hence, data collection would become one of the primary functions of an NGO and will ultimately prove to be vital in the process of alleviating conflicts, thereby distinguishing an NGO from developing governments. Our opposition brought up multiple points regarding the military and how they can help with crisis relief, when in fact, for the vast majority of time, militaries do not do this and instead make people more disadvantaged, such as my partner mentioned in Turkey, and such as the actions of the US military in Iraq and the Assad regime's actions against their own people in Syria, and the Saudi coalition in Yemen's bombing campaign has killed many civilians and made many people disadvantaged. The opposition also brought up a point regarding socialized healthcare, and when there is socialized healthcare, that means that taxes are higher, and when taxes are higher, has the potential, it makes more people disadvantaged because they can no longer afford certain items. The opposition also brought up a point regarding overhead costs and how NGOs have very high overhead costs, which takes away from their effectiveness. But many governments, such as the government of Jordan, pay their ministers with so much money and so much of the government's income that they could be using to help disadvantaged people, but instead the governments use this for their own personal gain. And then they mentioned multiple conflict zones and what NGOs did in Rwanda and many other areas. But all of these issues were started by governments themselves, such as the genocide in Rwanda, which was initiated by the government. Thank you.
Do you guys want 30 seconds?
Yes, please.
Yeah, oh.
Do you have any statistics or sources for the example given about Jordan?
Jordan, we currently do not have any statistics about this, but this is a known fact. So you had a point regarding reinventing the wheel. Could you please provide your source for that, as you only mentioned evidence and you didn't give your source?
I don't know if I'm supposed to do that right now. How does the NGO's data collection improve the lives of disadvantaged people in comparison to the governments?
This has this effect because after these NGOs have collected this data, they can use it, as I mentioned, to find the underlying causes of crises and help solve them. Because with this data, they can really zero in on what the issue is and what they need to do to alleviate it. And then, on your point about the military, how would you respond to the fact that the majority of the military of the country is actually not being deployed or being used at the time, and those troops are still being paid? So how would you?
Which country?
I'm talking about countries in general.
Oh, okay.
So how would you respond to the fact that when this is happening, their funds are being diverted from crises to pay their own troops?
I'm sorry, I don't understand how this is. Can you restate it, please?
Alright. So on your point about the military, you mentioned how they are effective at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. But how would you respond to the fact that the majority of the nation's military at any given time is not being put into active use and they are still paying these troops? So how would you respond to the fact that their funds are being diverted from crises to paying their own troops?
I don't see that do you have any evidence or statistics to back this up? Because I don't know any examples where there is being diverted or how this is relevant. I mean, we gave an example of how military assets helped NGOs. They help them get to hard to reach areas, so I don't really see correlation to that. We have many instances where NGOs and governments work hand in hand efficiently. When you say that's more effective than NGOs alone because they have more resources, more people, more money, they get to work together instead of just NGOs alone. I can provide you with evidence.
As my partner and I have mentioned before, governments employ NGOs and they fund them to do their own work for them because they can't use these funds effectively.
Yeah.
My partner will bring that up in their next sheet.
Do you have any statistics or evidence for the government's efforts in the cases you gave? So we can actually put NGOs' efforts in comparison to the government?
Can you please specify which case?
It was the Red Cross one, you gave us the Can you say that?
So, you wanted the
Statistics about the government, so we can put the NGO's efforts, as you said, in comparison to the government to see if they are.
my partner will bring up those.
Okay, sure. Yes, it's, yes.
Can we have 30 seconds?
Easier.
At this point, my partner and I have negated that on balance, NGOs are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Our contentions were NGOs have weak planning and management capacity, interdependence on governments, lower productivity in the healthcare sector, lack of coordination amongst one another, participation in inhumane and illegal actions, and inflated overhead costs. Our opponents stated that their contentions were that NGOs were more versatile. Our opponents brought up concern about the funding for NGO being translated as governments doing the work for them. But we brought up the inflated overhead and the fact that they have inflated overhead costs along with insufficient evidence to tell us where the money is actually spent in relation to the beneficiaries. Our opponents raised concerns about military assets negatively impacting the community. However, we provided evidence for how military assets help the NGOs in providing disaster relief. Our opponents also stated that the genocide was due to the government, but the government had no role in this. They did not provide a source for their statistics in Jordan and stated that it is common sense, but when it is not.
Time and time again, the opposition has brought up the point of military as being the prime example of states helping their people. However, we assert the claim that that it is not true, because not only do militaries cost a great amount to maintain, they also are a burden on taxpayers, and furthermore, they are shown to create havoc in a multitude of scenarios, such as the ongoing Turkey Kurdish crisis, and many others that my partner has brought up previously. Furthermore, they talked about how versatility is not significant to this issue. However, the very fact that 1/3 of NGOs' funds come from the government means that the government commends NGOs for their vast versatility, as NGOs may address a whole spectrum of niche issues, whereas governments fail to do so, and thus must contract NGOs to do so. Moreover, the inflated overhead costs are effectively mitigated due to our statistical evidence. And Bangladesh has increased their labor force, their output threefold without increasing the quantity of employees they have. Thus, it is evident that overhead costs are being diminished in this current moment, whereas they have stated no facts denying our claims about how governments have their own overhead costs as well. They have not made in short, we believe that the opposition has not made the comparison between how governments are superior, rather they just listed facts that governments have performed in various scenarios, without statistical evidence that they had outperformed or outcompeted the NGOs. Thank you.
How much time do we have left?
Just for 3 breaks.
A minute.
We have 30.
Okay. Do you have any other statistics or evidence about how, relating to the example I gave about Jordan?
Well, we do have some of the government expenditure lists in some sort of income statement that we have in my file somewhere, which was produced produced sometime this year on the wages of ministers.
Can you provide it with pictures, please?
We will bring that up shortly. Furthermore, you've asked thrice for evidence on how NGOs are mitigating jobless progress, and you have not provided any contextualization for that point. It was just a blatant claim. Do you have any evidence?
Actually, yeah, so when we talked about the genocide, we said that NGOs, the lack of coordination amongst one another, caused the chaos and caused all those deaths of the refugees, which is why they can't work hand in hand with each other because they're not taking account the other efforts of NGOs.
Do you have any other piece of evidence besides Turkey to negate our contention of military assets?
Yes, we do. We have multiple. We have the Yemen scenario ongoing between Saudi and Yemen. We have the Iranian-Saudi-US conflict or the shooting of drones thereof, which is wasting a lot of capital, a lot of money for no apparent reason.
And then we have the example of United States incursion in Israel in 2003.
So there's no evidence for how this has actually affected them afterwards.
No, we do have evidence. The U.S. has put over 540,000 troops in Iraq during this time.
And as we can see, Iraq right now is in distress. And all of this began, many people in Iraq are disadvantaged currently. And this was all because of the actions of the United States in 2003.
Furthermore, you have repeatedly brought up points about how militaries are the ideal way to resolve conflict. However, you have not acknowledged the subsidies they have to pay for, the subsidies they have to pay for veterans, and the costs of maintaining military, in addition to the burden on taxpayers. Is there any such evidence to show that people are paying towards the costs of militaries as opposed to their effect?
How is that relevant to our resolution that NGOs are more effective than government and criminalizing disadvantaged people?
You did bring up a lot of statements on how the state can use its military for good. However, you also negated our point by saying that there's great overhead, the inflated overhead costs. Thereby, you have not stated any of the inflated overhead costs of the military itself, when military personnel are being supported with money from the state rather than the money from the state going directly to.
I wouldn't consider that inflated overhead because just paying them themselves, that's not overhead unless they're getting extra.
Or veteran subsidies.
Yeah, but that's not considered overhead. Are they getting travel per diems, any of that? I don't think so. You have the quantity you rebutted on is saying that the quantity of employees did not change, but their output did increase. Quantity of employees, I wouldn't consider that overhead though, because we're talking about each employee's individual salary and the extra pay that they're getting for things other than the work they're doing. So how is that relevant in the?
The point of our contention is to show that.
Yeah, you can.
Show that costs have been mitigated. Costs haven't increased, whereas productivity has increased threefold. That means it costs 1/3 as much to produce the same output as you would have previously, which means that NGOs are far more effective at the implementation of new technologies.
My partner and I believe we have won this debate because we have clearly proven that on balance, non-governmental organizations are not more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. We have supported each of our contentions with evidence and statistics, some of which were from experts. We have proved to our judge these main points about the ineffectiveness of NGOs as opposed to governments when alleviating the lives of disadvantaged people. Contentions that were not adequately addressed were that NGOs have weak planning and management capacity, lower productivity in the healthcare sector, lack of participation in inhumane and illegal actions, and influence from undue influence from donors. It is hard to overlook the inhumane and illegal actions that NGOs partake in that prove to us their unreliability in judgment and their concerns being elsewhere other than the beneficiaries. The evidence we have provided for this was a French NGO smuggling children out of Chad without obtaining permission from their parents or the government. It is also hard to dismiss the inflation of overhead in NGOs. In the examples provided, approximately 9% of every donated dollar was spent on the beneficiaries, whereas the workers within these NGOs were living comfortably. Considering the fact that NGOs both suffer from undue influence from donors and consist of an inflated overhead, it seems as though money is being inefficiently allocated without the beneficiaries in mind. Just for these reasons, we urge a strong con ballot in today's debate. Thank you.
We have a minute and a half. If we have a minute and a half.
Everybody ready? We believe we have won this debate because the opposition has failed to negate our points regarding Dawn Solidaris, the American Red Cross, and they even failed to address or even bring up the MASK program, which is being put in place in India by the United States and India,
The American Indian
the America India Foundation. And as we have stated multiple times, and the opposition also mentioned how NGOs engage in misconduct, while militaries and states also engage in misconduct, such as the Saudi coalition in Yemen bombing schools and houses, bombing schools and hospitals, actually making people disadvantaged, and the multiple cases of abuse committed by the U.S. military in Iraq in 2003. And they have failed, and our point regarding Dawn Solidaris and how their overhead costs have stayed the same, while they have been able to increase their work and all their efforts by 3, shows that negates their point regarding overhead costs, because they're using the same amount of money to do 3 times the amount of work, showing that in this case, they are effective in reducing their overhead costs. The opposition also failed to mention how the costs of militaries and the management of militaries takes away from funds that could be diverted elsewhere. And then, so the opposition also mentioned several NGOs that were engaged in misconduct and didn't do their job, but that's only 3 out of the 12 million NGOs out there, showing that NGOs as a whole are effective because the vast majority of them are doing what they're supposed to. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Good job. Good job.
Good job,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. So you guys last debate.
Yeah.
It's like these shirts and
Yeah.
You just show up.
We begin at 9:15, right?
Yeah.
I'll come till then. Let's grab a coffee.
Yeah, of course. Are you supposed to wait here for your dad, or do you know what you?
I'm doing the comment wall, like,
Oh, okay.
like, like E. Six,
Oh, I see, but you're,
comment.
it's not starting yet, it starts at 9:15. Right now, it's actually, it's 8, like, it's 8:53.
Oh, cool.
So you can wait a bit, you can wait in the LC if you want, you know where the room is now, so
Yeah.
if it's time. So you can wait, you don't have to be here yet.